welcome to our space. I'm really pleased to be here, kind of joining you for a 90-minute workshop, offering some practical insights and ideas from the field of clinical psychology and how you might be able to best support yourself in navigating the storm of MCAS. But if I was sat where you were, I'd want to know a little bit about my background. So I'm going to spend 5 minutes giving you a little bit of a potted history of myself. So I began doctoral training to become a clinical psychologist almost 10 years ago. And in my final year, I worked in both a secondary care pain clinic and also a department supporting individuals with medically unexplained physical health difficulties. And it was really there that I became quite interested in how we can support individuals with the psychological adjustment processes associated with the onset of significant and sometimes persistent physical health problems. And then following that, as a qualified clinical psychologist, I worked at 2 national specialist rehabilitation centres for chronic and disabling pain conditions down in Bath. And by nature, they were individuals who were really profoundly affected by pain. Then 3 years ago, I jumped ship and I looked at supporting NHS workers, frontline workers. And the evolution of the role really meant that actually a lot of my one-to-one case work was still supporting people with physical health difficulties, whether that was long COVID, chronic pain, ME, POTS, something else in between. And so I kind of oscillated then to supporting people who were functioning at a higher level, but ultimately physical health was still getting in the way of them living the life that they most wanted to. And about 2.5 years ago, I set up my own private practice called Holding Hope Therapies, where I wanted to work with individuals more creatively, flexibly over a longer period of time and specialise in supporting people with physical health difficulties. And this was where I was first introduced to MCAS by one of my clients. So I'm absolutely in no way an expert in MCAS, just laying my cards completely on the table. Most of what I understand about the condition comes from a combination of what my client has generously shared, my own research, and being married to a medical doctor who's a anaesthetist but intercalated in immunology, and sitting him down and saying, tell me everything that you know about mast cells and their mechanisms of action and MCAS, help me understand how this looks and feels for for individuals. So I know that we'll each be on our own journey of trying to make sense of this complex and typically fairly poorly understood condition. But one thing that I'm absolutely clear about in my mind is that irrespective of the physical health condition that individuals kind of present with and have presented with over the last 10 years, and there's a massive cross section, if you step back, you'll see that absolutely there's some diagnostic differences in these conditions, but the emotional pain and suffering, there's usually a massive amount of overlap. So feeling disconnected, helpless, hopeless, stuck, disbelieved, sad, anxious about the future, that all looks remarkably similar. And given that the National Institute of Clinical Excellence is yet to write guidelines on how clinicians should be working with MCAS, that has been agreed by those on kind of MAS, it feels to me that it makes sense to utilise what we know about how we support other people up against physical health difficulties where there are similar psychological adjustment processes at play. And that is very much what I'll be bringing into this space, and the approaches that I use and lean heavily on that are recommended by NICE include third wave CBT approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy and compassion focused approaches too. So in terms of our aims and objectives, we're going to spend some time looking at some of the common emotional responses to MCAS onset. I am going to introduce some of the key theoretical ideas from these 2 models and share with you some skills and strategies designed to help support your emotional well-being. And afterwards, I'm going to spend 10-15 minutes or so thinking about signposting within the NHS, beyond the NHS, and also to some really good self-help material that is out there. So we'll do that as well. In terms of what to expect, I really hope that it feels a warm, inviting, inclusive space. You can expect a mix of theory and personal-based kind of practices as we go through. It is a workshop about supporting you to consider how you best respond to MCAS in ways that support your well-being, but really these ideas should help you navigate any future challenges. I'm going to be speaking for around 75 minutes, at least that's my plan, with 15 minutes of questions at the end. If you are sat there with a burning question and think, I can't sit on this, I really want to ask, please pop it in the chat. Someone will flag it to me, and I will do my best to kind of answer as we go through, or feel free just to unmute yourself and chip in. The other thing to mention is that as a psychologist, I'm not medically trained in any way, so I can't speak to the medication side of things. So just wanting to be super transparent on that. And I know Cherise did a lovely bit of housekeeping, and I guess my own safe space agreement to make sure that it is a space where people feel safe enough to authentically and usefully share during the workshop. And there are kind of bits punctuated through. I'll be asking for your experiences. If you want to pop those into the chat and kind of share them, that would be brilliant. But it probably goes without saying that we absolutely want to have an open, non-judgmental position for all of us, for us, and very much for each other. There's mutual respect. Every person in our virtual room will bring something enriching to the space. I truly believe that. So let's make space for all voices to be heard should people wish to share parts of their experience. Only share what you feel comfortable with. Be as present and receptive as you can, and know that everything that we do here is by invitation. You can opt out at any point and absolutely do what you need to do here to keep yourself safe. So I don't know what's happening in your life, but if we do a practice and you think, oh, that felt tricky or that felt hard, feel free to kind of oscillate in and out of this space as much as you need. So I've shared with you a little bit about our direction of travel. And I'm going to start with a brief arriving practice. Now, if you want to turn off your camera at this point, if you think, oh, I'm going to get really hooked by what other people how other people might be looking at me or engaging me in some way, that is absolutely fine. Feel free to turn off your camera. But I really hope that it helps us kind of set the course for how we want to arrive into the space. So to begin with, what I'm going to invite you to do is come to a nice, upright, confident body posture. Ideally, nothing crossed, 2 feet on the floor. And just spend a minute just coming off autopilot, recognizing it's pretty late in the day. And you guys will have spent a lot of your day doing various things. Just see if you can spend a moment really arriving into the here and now. Just noticing what you can see, what you can hear, and what you can feel. And then set your intention. What do you plan to do here? What outcome are you aiming for? Why does being here matter to you? How do you want to show up to this space in a way that supports you? And finally, are you willing to have difficult thoughts and feelings if that is what it takes? And again, whenever you're ready, just connecting with the present moment, your intention, your values, and the willingness to be here and be in contact with some of the difficult stuff as we explore MCAS and its impact on life. Just sit in it. Move your spotlight of attention to your breath. Take a few slow, deep breaths. Then open your eyes. Perhaps bring some movement to your body. And then just an invitation to write in the chat how you're arriving into the space and anything that you hope to gain by being here. Okay, Charisse, would you, I can't see the chat, so would you be able to just shout out anything that's kind of popping up in there if anyone's felt able to kind of speak to either of those questions?
There's nothing in there at the moment, but I'll.
Okay. Oh, something's popped up. Lovely.
Can
A
you?
bit tired. Yeah. A bit tired, but looking forward to hearing more. Feeling optimistic. Yeah, love that. Okay. Yeah, but a lot of tiredness. It's late in the day, isn't it? But it sounds like there's some hope in here. I'm looking forward to having some additional tools here. And I absolutely want to depart some of those to you and hopeful for some knowledge. Yes. Well, I think we can speak to both of those, and lovely to hear that people are keen to learn more about ACT and CFT. Brilliant. Okay. So let's dive straight in, and we're going to look at the first part is really exploring some of the common emotional responses to MCAS, and I wanted us to get really clear together on what MCAS means. And so I want you to sit in this question, recognizing we're all on different kind of journeys, but also my understanding of MCAS is it can really present differently for different individuals. There can be different triggers. It can manifest in kind of different ways. For sure, there's similarities, but there's also differences. So I guess I wondered if people felt able to just jump into the chat and type a word or a few words or even a sentence about what MCAS means to you. There's no right or wrong here, but just sharing a little bit about your experience. Okay, a complete lifestyle change. Yeah. Isolation, being left behind. Complex, absolutely. Challenging, frustrating, really uncomfortable, debilitating, restrictions, and a need for self-discipline. Yeah, somebody else has spoken about missing out, and somebody just after them has jumped in and said, I just don't think I can join in with things at times, perhaps in the ways that I used to before. Unpredictable, scary, overwhelming, not supported by medics, on alert, failure. So there's a huge cross section of experiences, right? And you guys are already sort of moving into speaking to some of the challenges MCAS is posing to your emotional well-being, with people kind of noticing, I'm not able to lean into valued activities in the ways that I used to before. I feel more alone in that, as well as speaking to some of the kind of physical symptoms that people typically sort of describe. So I guess how I wanted to start here was by offering what I think is a pretty narrow definition, but perhaps something that joins the vast majority of people arriving in this space. And that is absolutely that MCAS is characterized by the excessive and inappropriate activation of mast cells, type of white blood cell involved in immune responses. And this leads to the release of inflammatory mediators such as histamine, but a whole range of others as well. And it causes a vast range of symptoms like allergic reactions, gastrointestinal issues, cardio issues, and neurological kind of symptoms. And these can vary from person to person and be triggered by a range of things: food, stress, environmental factors, perfume, temperature. So that's sort of it in a nutshell, but I like to think of MCAS as a little bit of an iceberg. So these might be some of the symptoms that sort of sit within MCAS that you can see above at the top of the iceberg. But there's all of this stuff that sits underneath it, some of which you guys are speaking to already: poor sleep, isolation, loss of identity, struggling to be believed, access treatment, obtain a diagnosis, people getting the wrong diagnosis routinely, feeling helpless, hopeless, fearful, worried. There's a lot of stuff that people are contending with here. And I tend to think of this iceberg stuff as representing the first arrow of pain, the primary suffering. And the secondary suffering, which is the bit that I think that I can hopefully offer some ideas that can help you. The secondary pain is how we respond to it. For many, when pushed around by intense grief, anxiety, and fear, it's hard to respond 100% of the time in ways that support our well-being, that help us really step into the qualities of the person that we want to be, ways we want to relate to ourselves, the suffering, our loved ones, the life we want to cultivate, and ultimately our values, the things that matter deep within our heart. And we can absolutely get hooked by all of this iceberg stuff. And it can push us around in ways that adds to the pain and suffering that that people experience. And sometimes people tell me that it can feel a little bit like being in a hole, that the onset of any physical health problem can be a little bit like being in a hole, where you're looking up at life that feels a bit out of reach, and sort of watching it sort of go by. And life has gifted this particular person in the hole a shovel to try and control the emotional pain and suffering tied to this. So they get digging. They work really hard at trying to control these difficult emotional responses that happen as a result of MCAS. They might withdraw from people altogether, or spend huge proportions of the day distracting, or ruminate endlessly about the things that might possibly go wrong, despite the likelihood of that being sort of really small. And a lot of this stuff can happen on autopilot without a great deal of awareness that people are digging. But ultimately, there's a question here, right? Is that person moving closer or further away from the things that matter deep within their heart? And responding in this way, really understandably trying to minimize or control as much of the secondary suffering as kind of possible, is okay in the short term. But in the longer term, if we're not finding ways to connect with the things that really matter to us, that give us a sense of meaning, vitality, and purpose, then our well-being can suffer. And again, this picture of sort of our values is represented on a compass, so we can kind of lose sight of the direction of travel that we want to go because we're so consumed with we're trying to control what's happening, and sort of firefight and live as we are sort of now. And if we think about what well-being is, it's a little bit of a buzzword, but it's really about being sufficiently resourced emotionally, socially, and physically to manage the challenges faced in life. And when we can do this, we say that the well-being is okay. We're in the balanced kind of point. And typically, when well-being is optimized, people feel a sense of satisfaction, they feel fulfilled, their preferred internal states, and a sense of mastery. But if you encounter something like MCAS, the challenge on that end of the seesaw has suddenly become incredibly big, just thinking about what sits underneath the iceberg. And that actually the individual resource pool has often shrunk for people where physically they don't feel anywhere near as resourced as they used to before MCAS arrived into their life. And social connections might have dwindled, and emotionally people might feel really, really fatigued and up against it. And in these moments, our well-being can suffer. So some of the ideas from compassion focused therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy is about doing what we can to grow the individual resource pool that you have, and to support you to be able to make really conscious moves that support your well-being. One of the biggest challenges, I think, that relates to the response to the onset of MCAS is grief. And what you'll see on the screen is an extension of a pretty sort of famous stages of grief model by Cooper and Ross. And it's an extension of their 5 stages of grief model, where they talk about denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But actually, my experience and what I see from most individuals is that there is not a sequential moving through stages at all. It's really messy. And it's really messy day by day, where people are sort of moving in and out of different positions. And actually, arguably, a much better way of thinking about grief was developed a little bit sort of later, and this is known as the dual processing model. And I wonder if this might resonate with people's experiences, where here they sort of say individuals tend to oscillate between feeling very loss orientated, where they're really in the trenches with sadness, fear, anxiety, and really struggling to connect with meaningful activities that were easily engaged with once upon a time. And life has become sort of very small, and people are really overwhelmed with the emotion of it. To then swinging like a pendulum to a restoration orientated kind of response, where people are really trying to attend to themselves, restore a sense of normality, even briefly, getting to appointments, attending social gatherings, picking up the phone and calling friends. And what you find at the beginning is that people swing a lot between these two positions, often really sort of unpredictably. They swing perhaps many times a day. But over time, the pendulum swings less severely, really, and more predictably. And people start to move to a more restoration orientated response in terms of how can I find a way to live alongside whatever has sort of happened to me. Personally, I think that is a better way to sort of depict lots of people's experiences of kind of swinging on this pendulum. And I really like this picture of sort of helping people to perhaps think about how you might sit with grief. And this picture kind of originated in bereavement work as a result of somebody kind of passing away, but actually it has real kind of mileage with in the physical health arena, when people are up against really significant and sometimes sort of persistent difficulties. So this lady is saying, I mother it, I hold it, I hold its hand. I don't say, shh, I wait until it's done. Then we stand, and then I get back to the dishes. And that is completely sort of at odds with the alternative of what the modern day would have you do, and what you can find lots of people do that perhaps can add to the suffering. So if you think about a beach ball in a swimming pool, I don't know if anybody else has tried to hold that beach ball underwater, but you can only hold it down for so long before inevitably it pops up, often at twice the speed and with a lot more force than if it was allowed to just kind of float beside you within the water. And our emotions are a little bit like that. That we live in a society where we're sort of encouraged not to feel stuff in loads of ways, and to push stuff down and to bury it and cut off from it and detach from it. But often we can only do that beach balling, holding down for so long before it comes back. So the things that we don't want, usually by pushing them down in that way, we have them more. So lots of the approaches and the ideas that I'm going to be kind of offering as we make our way kind of through today is that it's not about trying to get rid of unhelpful thoughts, worries, concerns, fears, judgments that you might have here, because it's not them in and of themselves that are problematic, but how we relate to them that adds to that kind of secondary suffering part of the bullseye that I showed earlier. We are absolutely looking to reduce the extent to which they unhelpfully influence our behaviour and increase our ability to connect with our values in a more prominent way that helps us guide our actions, even in the face of physical health difficulties. Our value system is never lost, and often it's about thinking outside of the box and getting really creative about what we can connect with that helps give us that purpose, vitality, and meaning back. And so some of the resources that I'm going to be sharing at the end, particularly thinking about ACT, really lean into asking some beautiful questions about values, doing value clarification sort of work, where you're really thinking about what matters deep within your heart and the personal qualities that you most want to be embodying as you look to live well in the presence of MCAS and take it with you and connect with some of those identities that might have been lost for a period of time. And in that way, we're able to take ourselves off autopilot and to start making steps up the ladder and reconnect with the things that matter most sort of to us. Now, if you're sat there and this resonates and you're thinking, yep, I'm absolutely in a hole, and how I'm responding to that first arrow, that primary pain, that iceberg, it isn't working for me. And I have lost touch with what matters deep within my heart and how to take valued, sort of guided action. But I'm really up against it internally, and I wouldn't know how to make those meaningful moves to support my well-being in order to be able to initiate that first step. Then you've come to the right place, because that is absolutely where we're going to start. And my aims, my second and third aims in terms of kind of sharing some theoretical ideas with you from CFT and ACT alongside some skills-based practices I've just interwoven in this next section. So this is a fairly eminent British psychologist called Professor Paul Gilbert, and he is the founder of compassion-focused therapy. And he defines compassion as the courage to descend into the reality of a human experience. And with that, he saw compassion as having two components. The first component is a sensitivity to suffering of ourselves and or others. And in order to be able to be sensitive to our suffering, we have to be able to engage with it. So that's the first psychology that he spoke to. And being able to engage with it includes being able to notice, being able to sit alongside, to seek to understand the distress that's there. And following that, take action. So it's a sensitivity to suffering with a commitment to relieve and prevent it. That secondary suffering kind of part of the bullseye that I presented kind of earlier. So it's action orientated. It's about engaging in that wise action that might support you to minimize some of the suffering that is much more likely to be within your sphere of control and influence than the MCAS symptoms that arise sort of themselves. And I'm really mindful that compassion can be a bit of a buzzword and sort of be everywhere. And perhaps other people are thinking about compassion in a different way, but I really want us to hold tightly to Paul's definition, because through that we can see that compassion has many faces. So typically in the West, if we look at the images to the right of our screen, we often associate compassion with being very soft, being very gentle, being very slow and kind of nurturing. And it absolutely can be that. But if we also think about the firefighter top left, and we go back to this definition of compassion, a sensitivity to suffering with a commitment to try and prevent and alleviate it. So the firefighter that sees a person in a burning building is sensitive to their suffering. He takes action to get in there, kit himself up, get the hose, call other firefighters kind of there, aggressively batten down the doors, etc., to get to that person. There is nothing slow, gentle, soft about his response, but it's absolutely still compassion. Again, the picture in the middle of a child that might be leaning towards a pan and a hot stove. A mother might respond by shouting and pushing that child out of the way. That is a compassionate act. They're sensitive to the child's suffering. They're taking action to prevent and alleviate it. And I guess I want us to hold that in mind, that these other faces of compassion don't feature enough within our ideas of what compassion kind of are. And we can be fiercely compassionate. We can be courageously compassionate. It can look very different. But the thing that binds all of these images together is the care and commitment, wisdom, and courage. Those are the qualities that allow people to take compassionate action. Okay, so let's have a little look at why this can be tricky. Being compassionate, especially towards ourselves, thinking about the different flows that compassion can take. We can either be compassionate to others, we can receive compassion, or we can be compassionate towards ourselves. Often people find it really hard to be compassionate to themselves. And if we think about the evolution of the brain and why this is hard, I think this can just be helpful in our understanding of why it's tricky, but also why it's worth sort of grappling with. So our brains are the result of millions of years of evolution. And this means that we've got an old brain, which is motivated by basic needs and wants and is designed to maximize our chance of survival. It's threat focused. But we also have a new brain, which evolved approximately 2 million years ago and has developed capabilities such as being able to imagine, look into the future, look to the past, have a sense of self, an ability to consider others and our interactions with them. And the new brain is both fantastically skilled and helpful, but also incredibly tricky. Because what it means is that we're designed to focus on threats, and we have the ability to sort of continue thinking about them, to imagine the worst case scenario, to replay really difficult moments that have happened in the past, even though the threat might no longer be present, or at least present in the same way. And so what can happen is we can get caught in these sort of feedback loops between the old brain and the new brain. And why I think this is particularly, well, before I go there, I guess I want you to know that if you're somebody that finds yourself worrying, fearful, in a tangle internally with worry and anxiety, this makes perfect sense based on the brain and how it's been evolved to function. It's absolutely not your fault. But it can be our responsibility to do something about it, to be able to respond in ways that supports us to come out of that hole as best as we can. And what we know about how the brain and the mind responds is that it does not differentiate between physical, emotion, and social threats. They're all experienced in exactly the same way. And it's exactly the same, whether that's an external source or an internal one, that actually when we get hooked by rumination, we can create these feedback loops between the old brain and the new brain. And we, as beings that used to live in tribes, absolutely are concerned with how we're seen in the minds of others, which can also add to our suffering. So this makes living between your ears incredibly difficult, especially if there are lots of threats. And I think with MCAS, and you feel free to shake me up if I have this wrong, but there are lots of threats here, lots of additional social threats as well. And some of the research shows that the biggest fears of those living with persistent physical health difficulties, especially those that are pretty poorly understood in the medical kind of model field, is people report feeling disbelieved, being really fearful that they'll be seen as unproductive or a burden to those around them or society in some way. And they report high rates of being ignored, humiliated, embarrassed, and devalued by others. And all of this collectively often negatively impacts people's self-view and their well-being. So I'm sharing this with you, I guess, to try and share that living between your ears as a human is pretty hard anyway, based on how the mind has evolved. But actually, living between your ears becomes much harder if you're navigating threats from lots of different angles, threats in terms of threats to your body and its functioning, and threats from people not believing or invalidating you in a particular way. Threats to having to explain, threats of not being believed. And if we take a bit of a closer look at some of Paul's ideas, and this is hopefully where I'm hoping that for a number of people on the call, there'll be a penny drop moment where people go, I get it. I get the thing that might be able to support me in this when nothing else feels like it's cutting the mustard. Is he came up with this idea that there are 3 emotion regulation systems. And these have developed based on their different evolved functions. So we're going to have a look at each one in turn. So I've already spoken a little bit about the threat focus system. So we have a threat detection system that's activated by lots of different types of threats: physical, social, emotional, and it's designed, this system, to protect, to offer safety. And it's associated with emotions like anger, anxiety, and disgust. So these are some of the threats that can perhaps turn it on. A difficult moment with a colleague, a particular environment's difficult. Lots of other things related to MCAS that could absolutely feature on that particular slide. But when this threat system is turned on, it's almost like a pair of glasses. So it really alters where we attend. So it really alters our attention. It alters the type of thinking styles that we have. It alters what's happening in our body by turning on that fight or flight system and our physiological kind of responses. It makes certain emotions much more likely to be felt: anger, anxiety, disgust. And it really limits our behavioral repertoire. So it makes it much harder to mentalize, makes it much harder to be able to empathize with other people, to think logically, laterally, to feel kind of grounded and steady, and to often respond in ways that really support us. It's hard to do from a place of threat. Then we've got the drive system. And our drive system is concerned with achieving, pursuing, and obtaining the things that we need in life. And historically, that might have been food, shelter, or a mate, but now it might include getting to the bottom of the to-do list, getting that medical appointment, pursuing different titrations of certain medications. But it's a very sort of activating kind of system, and it's often associated with those buzzy emotions that tend to reinforce our behaviors. We're getting stuff done from this position, and that tends to be intrinsically reinforcing. So some extreme examples, I guess, where people may well be in the drive system, ticking things off their to-do list. Mo Farah winning an incredible race, achieving something that really matters to a group of individuals, whether that's graduation, really winning something. And again, this is a different type of pair of sunglasses that sort of people wear, that again, it alters our attention, it alters the thinking styles that we have, our motivations, what's happening in our body, the emotions, those buzzy emotions. It's linked to our dopaminergic systems, that we feel good from this position, and our behavioral repertoire is widened. So that is the drive system. Now, our last system is known as the soothe system. And it's sometimes referred to as our rest and digest system. So it comes online when we're not fighting threats and we're not working towards goals of acquiring the things that we need in life to live. It's non-wanting, and it's affiliatively focused. So it's really concerned with connection and feelings of safeness, and feeling sort of grounded and steady. And these are some kind of pictures. Our environment often has a lot to kind of to do with that. So nature can be one way of, for many people, turning on their soothe system. Connecting with somebody that really authentically sees your whole self, again, can be another way of turning this system on. And again, our soothe system shapes our attention. It shapes our thinking processes, our motivation, what's happening in our body, our behaviors. We're much more likely to be able to empathize, to mentalize for other people and for ourselves, to really be able to turn towards our pain and suffering and sit with it in ways that were similar to that lady that was kind of really mothering and creating some room, a willingness to kind of sit with her grief. The soothe system often allows us to be with ourselves in really useful ways. And the propensity for compassion, the ability to be sensitive to our suffering and to take action to prevent and alleviate it, we're most able to do that when these three emotion regulation systems are in balance. Now, I just want you to sit in what I've just said. When these three systems are in balance. So these systems are plastic, yeah? So often it can be around doing what we can to reduce the reds, to build the blue, and to grow the green. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do this, but I just want you to sit in the question of how in balance would you say your three systems are? If you take the last 2 weeks, how much time do you think you've spent in threat, in drive, in soothe? And again, if you're feeling willing, just jump into the chat, and all people already are, I love that, and just write down the system that you think that you're spending most time operating in. Somebody has jumped on and said, I'm almost all in red. I can absolutely believe that. And I want to be clear that this is not about individuals not working hard enough, not responding well enough. It's very difficult to not be in red a lot of the time. Look at what you're contending with. Somebody else has said, I bounce around a bit. Yeah, the last 2 weeks, definitely in red. Threat and drive. Yeah, okay. So absolutely, people are spending a significant amount of time within a threat and drive. And what you can sometimes find is, let's see if my animation works. Okay. So what you can sometimes find is that things were more balanced before MCAS came along, but the threat has grown. And there's nothing more threatening than not feeling like you have autonomy on your body, or feeling like it's playing tricks on you, or it's not reliably responding in ways that it used to. That can make inhabiting your body feel very threatening. There's no outrunning that. And there can also be all of these additional threats in terms of trying to access a diagnosis, treatment, support, trying to understand a very complicated condition. So people can also get very hooked in drive. So there's a threat-based social context of living with poorly understood physical health difficulties, which can have a crippling long-term consequence on us, on our well-being and our self-view. And when our bodies are perpetually under threat, we can become much more hypervigilant than we usually would. Then our threat system becomes much more easily activated and triggered, and everything, our worldview, becomes kind of more limited from it. And again, people work really hard at trying to solve the problem of MCAS in ways that often in the short term helps reduce emotional suffering, but in the longer term takes them further away from the stuff that matters deep within their heart. And so sometimes you can see a bit of booming and busting. You can certainly see a lot of seeking of control. And eventually what can happen is that these two areas kind of grow. There's less input coming in from the soothe. We're absolutely not in balance here. And these systems actually start to merge, and this is known as threat-based drive. And we're not designed, humans are not designed to spend extensive amount of periods operating within this way before they burn out. And you can be the most robust and resilient individual, but eventually you will burn out. And so I would argue it's never become more important for anybody than you, if you're arriving into our space, to be really considering, how do I take steps to grow the green, to consciously try and cultivate my soothe system, to create more balance in ways that can allow me to become more compassionate, in ways that then can allow me to feel more resourced, to turn back towards these threats from a resource position and to do what is required from that position. So absolutely, we're going to look at how you grow the green. Now, this soothing system that I've spoken about, research has shown that it's got a physiological kind of basis. There's a basis to feeling soothed, and we can train the system to become stronger. There's loads of science that supports that. Have a look at anything written by kind of Chris Irons, who is publishing kind of on this quite extensively. So I want to be clear that the soothe system is not about relaxing and switching off. It's very much about switching on in a particular way. It's about using our bodies to help our minds bring down the immediate threat and sort of arousal in ways that allow us to access those new brain competencies that allow us to mentalize and to think logically and laterally and outside of the box in exactly the kind of ways that we need when navigating the storm of MCAS. And that system is turned on when we connect with people. We really connect with them. We feel really seen by them. And we also do things that bring us a sense of pleasure and enjoyment. And I guess what I want you to think about here is that there can be a number of things that people do that might sit in either drive or soothe. So it's worth thinking about, how do I feel when I'm engaging in them? So I worked with somebody this morning that was talking about running. And initially she was saying, I really think that's kind of a soothe system activity. That's something that I kind of really love to do. But actually when she's running, it's really connected with those buzzy emotions. It's really connected with that sense of achievement, pursuing, wanting to get to 5K, wanting to be like a PB. She's really in the drive system. But if somebody was running and they were saying, or walking kind of fast, or whatever that might look like, and was kind of really noticing the sun on their face, or we're really kind of noticing and connecting with the earth between their feet, or how their body felt to kind of move in some way, that might much more sit in a Sue system kind of camp. So it's worth sort of thinking about, and that could be the same with knitting, that could be the same with kind of any activity you'd sort of take under the sun. And it could be that at different points, it would activate different parts of the system. But I guess one of the ways that you can start to really think about how you support yourself in meaningful ways is to consider, what are the moments historically that have brought me joy? And is there any way that I could start to embed those again right now? And some of that might be thinking really laterally and creatively and flexibly here. So you might be thinking, right now, I just couldn't get to a social gathering or a bar or a kind of a restaurant. That's absolutely not something I can do right now. It's just not within my power. That isn't a step that I feel I can take. And so I'd be saying, okay, when you're in that bar and in that restaurant, kind of socially connecting, what was the best thing about it? Oh, well, the best thing was catching up with friends. The best thing was around connecting with other people's lives. The best thing was kind of sharing jokes or moments and just talking. So then it's about thinking, okay, how do we start to get a bit of that, acknowledging, making room for MCAS? What would it be like? I'm not saying it's the same thing, but to start with, reaching out to a friend and picking up the phone. What would it be like to call up a friend and say, we're going to watch some reruns of Friends. Come on over. Let's sit and watch one or two together. What would it be like to really look for those small moments that bring you joy? So actually, if you're sat there going, I can't exercise right now, and that was really my thing. But when you were talking about the sun being on my face and the wind in my hair, like, yeah, I really enjoyed that. How do we get a little bit of that, if that is sitting in your garden for a moment, or just doing a really slow lap around your garden, or to the bottom of the street? Now, I'm not claiming that that's the same thing, but it's not nothing. And it could be a step on that ladder. And the other way that we can turn on this system is with some formal practices. So I'm going to invite us to engage in some formal practices now together. And so what I want you to do, if you want to turn off your camera, absolutely cool, no problem at all. If you want to keep it on, that's fine as well. But I want us to have a go at seeing if we can experiment with our breath. We're always with our breath, and we can absolutely use our body to help our mind know this is not a lion, bear, tiger situation. We can give it some feedback and help it kind of steady the ship physiologically. We can make some tweaks in ways that can support ourselves to get that frontal lobe kind of online, and to steady the ship. So what I want you to do is come back, if you're with me, come back to your nice, confident, upright posture. Place your 2 feet on the floor. Ideally have nothing crossed, and place one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And then if you want to shut your eyes, just to tune out any distractions, do. And to begin with, I just want you to observe your breath. Just be a spectator on it. See if you can notice the temperature of the air, whether it seems fresh, stale. See if you can follow it all of the way in and all of the way out. And if your mind wanders, which it will, it's hooked by sounds inside or outside of the room, or thoughts fly in like this is silly or this isn't going to help, just notice these as normal commentary of the mind. And just come back with me as best as you can on just observing the breath. And what I want you to do is experiment with your rate of breathing. Can you slow it down a fraction? Can you take a moment to breathe all of the way down into your feet? Hold it for a second and just let that breath go. And again, breathing all of the way down into your feet and letting it go. And your sole job for the next 30 seconds is just to see if you can step into a rate of breathing that feels soothing, grounding, and calming to your body. Breathing in a steady, even, and elongated way. And as you do this, you might notice your belly rising on the in-breath and subsiding on the out-breath. And as we start to bring this brief practice to a close, just widen your spotlight to find your body in the seat, your feet on the floor, and bring a little bit of movement through your body. And again, just an invitation, if you're willing, if you want to, in the chat, to just write a word, perhaps a couple of words, about what that process was like for you. Whether it was easy, whether it was hard, whether you noticed anything different, even fractionally in your experience right now. Love that, Judith. A slice of peace. Relax. Grounding. I often tell people, for what it's worth, and I love to hear about other people's experience of sort of using the breath, that sometimes you'll get to relaxation and sometimes you won't. And that's okay. If you get to a place of feeling relaxed, brilliant. Sometimes that can happen. And if you get to a place where you just feel a little bit more steady within yourself, a little bit more anchored, you've turned on the Soothe system in a way that absolutely will support you to be able to turn back towards the threat from a place of being on the riverbank rather than in the river. Really lovely reflections. It's hard to stay awake. Heart rate slowing down, calming, really nice. Okay. And I love the breath because we've always got it, right? We've always got it, and we can place one hand on our chest, one hand on our belly, and get that biofeedback. Because when we're anxious and in a state of threat, we tend to breathe shortly and shallowly from our chest. And we can slow it down in ways that really support our body and our mind. The other thing that I want to introduce you to is something called compassionate gestures. So if I go back to this slide, I was talking about how connection, how when we were sort of really connecting to another, how that turns on our Soothe system. And this system has origins in our early attachment experience. So if I were to place a crying baby between us, and that baby was getting sort of really upset, the things we might instinctively do is to pick it up, to touch it, to rock it, to let it know that you're here. There's some physical contact that is going to be soothing to that baby. Now, as we grow up, we tend to stop asking people for physical contact to help soothe us in ways that we used to as infants or as children. And often there might not be somebody that is available to give us that hug when we really need it. But what if we could start to do some of that physical touch for ourselves? So what I want you to do, again, keep your camera off if you want to. Let's play around with some compassionate gestures and just see what feels nice and good for you. So you might do this by placing just one hand around your face, just cupping your face and just noticing how that feels, whether you like it, whether it feels nice or doesn't. Then adding a second hand, what difference does that make? Placing one hand above your heart, just connecting with the warmth of that hand on your chest. Noticing how that feels. Placing a hand over the top of it. Noticing how that feels. Crossing your hand or crossing your arms, giving yourself a bit of a butterfly hug, grabbing the meaty parts of your shoulders and just hugging yourself for a moment. And bringing that posture lower, so you're sort of holding your elbows. How does that feel? And then lastly, just cupping your hands like this and just placing them on your lap. And just noticing how that feels. That you have always got you. And then in the chat, if you want to, if you were able to kind of experiment with just playing around with some of these postures and seeing what feels nice, just write down any of the compassionate gestures that that you liked, but perhaps what your favorite was. Oh, lovely. Somebody's already written, I hug myself when I'm feeling anxious. Yeah, so some of this stuff we might already do. We might just not know. And we might feel good when we're doing it. We might not just know before today why it feels good. And I would guess it's turning on your C system. It's steadying the ship. Yeah, I love that. In the mornings, I sway gently with both my hands on my chest, sometimes tapping one. Yeah, okay, lovely. So again, both using the breath and gestures are ways of you being able to use your body to activate and help turn on this soothe system. And I just encourage you to kind of play around with it, have a go at doing some of this stuff, at laying the foundations. Yeah, lovely. Hands are always on the body, but this deliberate act feels soothing. So there's something that's really intentional about this, and just really connecting with what pressure do you like? How long do you like it to be there for? Because the warmth will kind of grow from it, and exploring in that way. So, a moment of reflection, and if you're arriving here and you can screenshot this, I would really encourage you to, or if you can take a picture of it too. But I want you to think about those small acts that bring you a sense of enjoyment. Is there anything you want to start doing again, or already do and think, I really want to do a little bit more of that in an intentional way that might help me turn on this soothe system, just given all that I'm contending with? And as you think about planting a seed and trying to cultivate it to grow, I want you to think about what difficult thoughts, emotions, bodily sensations will you need to make a bit of room for if you were to take this forward, if you were to create that pattern of change. What's going to sort of block you or get in the way, and how are you going to need to be able to kind of notice and make room for some of that stuff? And is it worth it? Are you willing to do that? If that's what it takes to be able to cultivate this soothe system a little bit more. And again, spend a few minutes thinking about when you feel the strongest sense of connection, who is that with? And what small steps could you take to claim a bit more of that? And again, what difficult thoughts, emotions, bodily sensations might you need to make a bit of room for as you do that? Stuff like they won't have time, or stuff like I don't want to be a burden, or I don't want to take from them if they're already busy. How do you notice and name that and thank your mind for that difficult thought? Yeah, that's the threat system coming online right there. And I'm going to connect back to my intention here, which is to grow the green and what matters to me about doing that in terms of being able to kind of respond with compassion and make moves that support you to connect with what matters deep within your heart. So I've got this as a handout that I've made that at the end of the session I will send to Therese. But again, the questions are the same. So again, if you want to take a screenshot, absolutely do. But I want you to think about things that you could commit to, that you could pledge to here in ways that if ideas from here has really resonated with you, you can use this as a springboard to be able to sort of get some movement on. So in a world where you could make and keep a commitment related to personal qualities you most want to show as you support yourself with MCAS, what commitments would you want to make and keep? What would be a major commitment here? And what would be a really small and still meaningful one? Perhaps so small that only you might notice. And then asking yourself the all-important question, what feels realistic and possible to take forward right now? And I can't emphasize how important it is to go small here, to think about those really small moves of just embedding that low-hanging fruit stuff that might be possible to do on more days than not. And to, as much as you can, think about it in a really smart way, be really specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound. What's this going to look like, this thing that you might pledge to? And in what scenarios are you most likely to lose contact with the personal value of doing it? And what thoughts, feelings, urges are likely to get in your way, hook you? What do you do when you're under the influence of them? Be on the lookout for those kind of moves, because a lot of this stuff can happen on autopilot. And finally, spend a little bit of time just thinking, when you find yourself turning away from this commitment, getting caught up with other things, what's going to help you return to it? What does that look like for you? Because there is a way out of the hole. And I think a lot of this way out is when we can find ways to connect with our values, and when we can respond really flexibly in ways that allow us to connect with the things that give us a sense of vitality and pleasure and meaning and purpose. Now, if you're sat here and your appetite has been whetted a little bit for CFT or ACT, and you're interested in kind of learning more and thinking about how you might be able to access support, the next couple of minutes I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour into some signposting, and hopefully I've provided a little bit of an insider's guide. So for those of you on camera, just raise your hand if you're aware that the NHS operates using a stepped care model. Yeah, okay, great. So a number of people are, brilliant. So the idea is that you offer something increasingly specialist and often more longer term and more kind of intensive the higher up the pyramid you go. So there's different levels of support. And I usually say if you're looking to access talking therapies, it's a little bit of a postcode lottery, with provisions varying from county to council, but your first port of call is your GP. And they will either be able to refer you to primary care mental health support if you notice, and this is really understandable and fairly typical, that your mental health kind of functioning is kind of suffering and you want some kind of support with that. They'll be able to refer you to IAP services, many of which have been rebranded as Talk Together or Let's Talk. But actually, if you Google yourself, where is my local IAP service? Google will tell you. and you can make your own self-referral. So you can refer yourself. You don't have to wait to get a GP appointment. And they were initially set up at services to relieve the pressure on secondary care mental health teams and reduce waiting times for individuals with lower level emotional difficulties. Now, they consist mainly of low intensity practitioners, usually with a couple of years experience in models like CBT, that are able to treat mild to moderate common mental health difficulties like depression and anxiety. They are very unlikely to have specialist knowledge of MCAS. However, if you are up against just feeling really low, feeling really anxious, they will be able to share with you skills and strategies designed to help tackle low mood and anxiety. And for some people, that might be a really helpful, free kind of starting point. And they tend to be delivered through a range of modes. So that might be guided discovery computer programs, that might be psychoeducation groups, that might be one-to-one work. And the session numbers are usually capped, so it's usually kind of short-term work. At the next tier, secondary care services, so your GP does need to refer you to things like adult community mental health teams. They exist across the UK, and typically clinicians working here work with more severe, complex and enduring difficulties, and they tend to have more training. And they include professions like me, clinical psychologists, that have a minimum of 6 years a sort of academic university experience, so everyone will hold a doctorate. And again, the focus is unlikely to be physical health within an adult community mental health team, but it will absolutely be about supporting you to manage the impact of poor mental health. Now, within secondary care, you also get things like secondary care, pain clinics and chronic fatigue services as well. And some of them might have some ideas. Hold things lightly. I'm a big fan of different strokes for different folks. See what's out there that you can access and can draw on, just thinking about my Venn diagram and the overlap in the middle. And see what you feel kind of fits for you. Now, to my knowledge, there are no specialist services within the NHS targeting MCAS in the same way that there are for chronic fatigue or chronic pain. So you can find national specialist services for pain. There's 2 down in Bath, both of which I've worked at, where you get really highly specialist centres and personnel that deliver like 30 hours of ACT, for example. They don't exist for MCAS. The other thing that I just wanted to, I guess, make you aware of, though, is if you find yourself admitted to hospital, all hospitals will have a liaison psychiatry service. And some of them are pretty good. So if anyone is in Cambridge, Addenbrooke's Hospital has a really good liaison psychiatry service, and certainly 10 years ago, and I know this because I used to work in there, people could be seen on an outpatient basis following an admission within a physical health stream by a clinical psychologist, but it's really patchy. So if you're living in Gloucester, the liaison psychiatry service doesn't have a therapeutic arm to it, at least not at the moment. So it's going to be really variable. But if you find yourself admitted to hospital and your mental health is really in the trenches, you could request to see somebody from the liaison psychiatry department and explore what provision is available. So that's just worth holding in mind, because lots of people tend not to know that. If you are really in urgent need of help, Samaritan, Shout, Staying Alive app, all really helpful. If you Google your local crisis team, I've just put Gloucester here because I used to work in a Gloucestershire NHS foundation. You will find their telephone number. If you can't keep yourself safe, go to 999, go to your nearest A&E department. The other thing that's worth thinking about is third sector support. So again, I'm absolutely showing the places that I used to live, but Gloucester and Cambridge, these are 2 charities that that have BACP accredited counsellors. I would really recommend finding somebody that is BACP accredited if you're looking to privately fund this yourself, because that will mean that they've had a certain number of hours delivering sort of counselling, and they've also got a supervision sort of structure in place. Now, if you're somebody that actually you want a supported listening space, you want a space where you can offload, where you can talk about how tricky things are, this might absolutely be a route to go down. So Cogwheel, for example, they've got a sliding scale where they charge as little as £27 a session, depending on income. They offer up to 20 sessions. They do remote and in-person kind of stuff, and you will find these little pockets of provision. So if a supported listening space is what you're after, this could absolutely be it. Other options are clinical psychologists working in the private sector tend to advertise out of Psychology Today and the Counselling Directory. They're HCPC registered. Most of us offer 15-minute free consultations. If you've got private healthcare cover, great. That will really help you be able to kind of access this. Typically, we're an expensive provision. Typically, you're looking at £90 to £100 a session, kind of upwards, if you're looking to fund this yourself. But I guess just worth thinking about as options. If you're sat there thinking, I absolutely can't afford that, but I'm really interested in extending the thread of ACT and CFT, these are some of my favourite books. So at the top, I've listed some of my favourite books from ACT. So if you're interested in thinking about how you can connect with your values and perhaps learn skills and strategies to unhook yourself from difficult inner dialogue that might sort of just get in the way of being able to make moves alongside MCAS. The Liberated Mind by Stephen Hayes is brilliant, as is all of the Russ Harris stuff, most of which you can find on Audible as well. If you're interested in cultivating compassion and self-compassion, there's some really nice books along the bottom. I think trauma is really a sort of relevant kind of here. That's why I'm kind of putting it in. But the Compassionate Mind workbook as well is a really lovely kind of interactive way of extending the thread here. And if you're looking for something that perhaps is more kind of symptom sort of focused, Ray Owen writes some lovely books, Facing the Storm and Living with the Enemy, on using a third wave CBT ideas and approaches to really think about how you show up in the face of this. I'm a big Ray Owen fan, so if you get a chance, he's definitely worth a shout. The other thing that I've done on my own website, so if you Google Holding Hope Therapies and click on my website, is I've got a resource tab with audios, with free audios that you can listen to. So I'm trained in Compassionate Mind training by Balanced Minds, and I have shared 10 audios that use imagery and visualization as a way of kind of building your C system. So you can log on there and use it. It's free to anybody. So, final reflections. Living well alongside MCAS is incredibly tough. It's easy to get hooked by unhelpful inner experiences when faced with very real physical health symptoms that exacerbate the suffering you're already experiencing. The practices shared today can help you become more aware in each moment and support you to make value-guided choices which tend to serve individuals better. And these skills are associated with having increased psychological flexibility, but they take time and commitment to cultivate. Be gentle with yourself as you practice relating in these ways and embedding any ideas that you found valuable from today. These are some of the people, Ray's right in the middle over here, that are real sort of leaders in the field of ACT and CFT. And that is it. So if anybody does have any comments and questions for our final 5 minutes or so, do jump on and feel free to ask them.